Well, greetings, warm greetings to all of you, and welcome to our worship service at the First Unitarian Church here in Salt Lake City. It's wonderful to have you a part of this worship service. We may not be able to see each other, but I think there's a distinct sense that we can feel the presence of one another. That's just a wonderful feeling. And if you are new or very, very new to our worship services, please check out our website and learn of all the wonderful opportunities you have to join a wonderful and vibrant church community. Speaking of vibrant church community, the only announcement today is really about the online auction. Of course, if we had our druthers, we would prefer being at the Marriott Hotel in Research Park, where traditionally now we've packed in close to 300 people, but we can't make it happen this year for obvious reasons, and so we're relying on everybody's spirit and ingenuity and know-how to do an online auction. It's a wonderful way to support our community and especially all those wonderful people on the auction committee who are working tirelessly to help the church. Budget is probably the best way to put it, but it's a lot of fun, and I certainly hope you will join in. It starts actually a week from Monday. That is September 28th, and as in the old early bird catches the worm, 10 o'clock in the morning, you can tune in to our silent auction. Silent auction will continue all week until we go live on Zoom Saturday, October 3rd from 7 to 9 p.m. Please be sure to join us. Need to register for the auction. It's free. You don't buy tickets. You just need to register. And so just go online and find out how to do that. It's a very, very simple way of doing it. www.biddingforgood.com, and there's the /FirstUU auction. Also, there will be a donate button, and be sure to push that donate button and be a sponsor for the auction. I'm going to do that, and I hope you will join me as well. The Fairly Free Thinker Award, which is really one of the most celebrated and fun aspects of the auction, this year will go to a very, very special woman. Her name is Lex Scott, and she is the founder and organizer of Utah Black Lives Matter. It is going to be absolutely wonderful to have her as the recipient of the Fairly Free Thinker Award. I've been in communication with her for a while. She is a complete joy, and I know you will enjoy watching her, hearing her very much. And finally, ensuring that we all have a splendid time at the auction, our hosts and auctioneers will be Becky Heel and Dylan Swick. So please remember the online auction. Hope to see you there. And now it's time to light our chalice, the symbol of our tradition. A chalice is lit throughout all of our UU congregations. And when I strike this match, we're going to then focus on Mike and Jan Crane, who are going to lead us in the chalice lighting. I think almost everybody has his or her own chalice or the family chalice, but the Cranes will lead us in the chalice lighting today.
Symbol of light and knowledge, symbol of warmth and freedom, we light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love.
Hi. I have to do something that I don't want to do. I have to go in to the church basement. Now, you may have never even seen this door before because it's hidden, but I have to get a music stand out of the basement, and it is not my favorite place. I'm gonna use the word afraid. I'm a little bit afraid of the basement. Now, while sometimes joyful things like kittens have been found in our church basement, it's usually just dark and scary. So I'm working up the nerve to open the door and go downstairs. Do you want to see how dark and scary this door is? I have my key right here. Okay. It's always locked because it's so dark and scary. Okay, are you ready? You ready to go see? Okay, here we are at the top of the stairs. You may not be able to tell how dark it is because I have the light on behind me, but it is so dark to the right and the left of the bottom of the stairs. There is a light switch that I'm gonna turn on, which makes this better. But let's go down the stairs. There's this beautiful mural painted at the bottom, which is joyful. But you get to the bottom of the stairs, and it is this long, dark hallway. The music stands are in that dark hallway. So I have to go through multiple rooms to get there. Come with me so you can see why this is scary and why I'm afraid. All right, going through the basement, and it's just so dark. You don't even know where you're going half the time. There is this light switch, and thankfully then all the lights are on. And you see a room filled with all kinds of things. Old recycling cans, coolers, a Christmas tree, and our music stand. I think my favorite feature of the basement, though, just have to show you if I'm down here, is the wallpaper on the walls. So from the Salt Lake Tribune. So it's a little delight down here, but it's scary. So let's grab one of these and go back up the stairs. Thank you for coming with me to go to the basement to get the music stand. The basement at church is just really dark. It's damp down there and it smells funny. And you are never quite sure what you're gonna find. I don't like going down there. It makes me feel afraid. And that's true for a lot of people when they're faced with something they don't understand or they've never experienced before. They become afraid. This is normal. It's normal to feel afraid when things are uncertain or even threatening, like the storm last week. As people, we like to know that things are going to turn out okay. We like to know that we are safe, we are cared for. When we're confronted with a situation we may not understand or feels new, people react in all different kinds of ways. Sometimes when they're afraid, they want to do like I did and want to hide or avoid a task. Sometimes people decide to try and get rid of the thing that they're afraid of. Your body physically reacts to fear. You start breathing heavier and your heart beats faster. It's called fight or flight. When people become afraid, their body naturally reacts. We can't control what we're afraid of. Sometimes fear just sneaks up on you when you least expect it. With so much out of our control lately, it's easy to feel afraid. Take comfort in knowing you're not alone. Take comfort in those around you who love you. May your fear of the unknown, whether it be a storm or a virus or a dark church basement, be eased with the love of those around you. May it be so.
I've always been a big fan of science fiction and fantasy novels, and one of my all-time favorites is Frank Herbert's Dune series. The opening chapter of the first book is one of the greatest first chapters in all of literature, with dramatic tension that goes from 0 to off the charts in a single page. The main character, the the Duke's son, Paul Atreides, is apprehended by the Reverend Mother, who forces Paul to put his hand inside a black box. "What's inside the box?" asks Paul. "Pain," the Reverend Mother responds. The goal for Paul is to keep his hand inside the box. If he withdraws it, the Reverend Mother warns, he will die. The pain will be nearly intolerable, but before he can even test his endurance, Paul must deal with his fear of the pain. And so he recites a litany that his mother has taught him. "I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain." The litany against fear is well known among science fiction fans, and there was a time in my life when I had it memorized. I would recite it to myself like a scripture, just like Paul, when I faced fear and pain in my own life. It reminded me, and it still reminds me, that sometimes the fear of pain can be worse than the pain itself. Grounding myself in something that I know helps me face it. And knowing that nothing lasts forever helps too. Everything passes. Fear and pain, grief and loss. All we can know for sure is that someday things will be different. This week, the 20th named tropical storm of the year ravaged the Gulf Coast of Alabama. Sally made landfall with Teddy and Vicky just behind her in the Atlantic, leaving just one name left on the National Hurricane Center's annual list of storm names for 2020. And we're just barely halfway through the hurricane season, which ends in November. Hurricanes are terrifying and awe-inspiring. The whipping winds that make the bones of your house groan and creak, winds that can drive pine needles into tree bark, rains that lash the eaves and submerge the streets. Hurricanes move slowly. They build gradually over the sea and push on shore, picking up water and wind as they go. And as they do so, the tension and fear in communities builds as well. They're more frequent now than they ever have been, thanks to climate change, and fewer people can afford to evacuate. They are forced to place their hands inside the box. They have no choice. So they board up the windows, they dust off the generator, if they're lucky enough to have one, they say their prayers, and they wait. If you've lived through a hurricane, then perhaps you know the eerie peace of the eye of the storm, and then the deep relief when the storm has finally passed over. You can finally go near the window to see whether the water is high, and when it recedes, you open the door and breathe in the cool, fresh air and take a first look at the damage. Before the storm, you were afraid of what you might find the next day. Flooding, damage, destruction. But after the storm, you know, it might be bad, it might be okay, but at least you know, at least the time for fear is over. Now the work begins. Perhaps the weather in your own life is stormy. Perhaps the dread of living in these times is building and building, threatening to wash over your levees and flood you. Who among us is not boarding up the windows and saying our prayers. And yet, we take heart. No feeling is final. Nothing lasts forever. We can be sure that things will be different someday, and that the actions we take today do make a difference. We recite to ourselves litanies against fear that keep us in our minds and bodies, that root us down to what is real and true. We permit fear to pass over us and through us, and no matter what comes our way, we remain together. And then we get to work. May it be so.
Hitchcock, Alfred Hitchcock. My mother was simply enamored with Alfred Hitchcock. I thought I'd mention that since the subject that we're going to wrestle with today is fear. And I mean, how can anyone talk about fear without bringing up Alfred Hitchcock? My mother didn't exactly love him. Then again, could anyone really love Hitchcock? No, she just admired him, mesmerized by his adept manipulation of fear. And when I think back to my own childhood, raised by extremely liberal parents who, after immigrating to New York, still carried this European arrogance of looking down on uptight Americans, my parents had no hang-ups whatsoever except when it came to Hitchcock. The only thing that I can remember ever being forbidden to see or participate in was anything that had to do with Hitchcock. Predictably, the one thing I wanted to see most, as though my life depended on it, was Alfred Hitchcock. Now, as a young teen, when it just didn't make sense anymore to bar me from the intrigue of Hitchcock, I remember watching Hitchcock and being terribly disappointed. Or was it that I just didn't like being made uncomfortable? I remember feeling a little confused about the violence because, well, it never really materialized. The violence, I noted, was all in my head. He made me imagine violence when I never wanted to go there. It seemed all so amorphous. I felt fear when actually there was no reason to be fearful. I was, well, never a fan of Hitchcock, although as I matured, I did concede to him a certain brilliance. I'll always remember a few summers ago when Mary and I were in our beloved coastal town in California called Bolinas. We took a day trip up to Bodega Bay. And during a lovely stroll there, Mary said to me, "Did you know that this is where Hitchcock filmed The Birds. Oh, I said, how nice. I remembered the film, how these benign birds suddenly turned on humanity. I quietly suggested to Mary that, it's time for us to get back to Bellinas. Instead, she helped me to relive the entire movie. After an extensive interview with Hitchcock back in 1962, the French film director, Francois Truffaut, referred to Hitchcock as an artist of anxiety. Now, that apt description started making even more sense when Hitchcock's latest biographer, Peter Ackroyd, summed up the theme of most of the Hitchcock films as ordinary people living in a familiar setting are suddenly plunged in a chaos world where no one is safe. Ordinary people living, in a familiar setting are suddenly plunged into a chaos world where no one is safe. Well, when we look at life's ambiguities today, from climate change to the West Coast literally on fire, to protests in virtually every major American city in which the escalation of violence breeds insecurity, to the very COVID virus itself, which overruns the public square without anyone noticing until it's too late, to an upcoming election where fascism threatens to unravel a nation's democratic order. We are plunged into a chaos world where no one, let's be frank, really feels safe. Now, I'm no anthropologist, but what I have gleaned from reading history about past civilizations is that there has always been this really tight relationship between fear and risk. Risk management is considered essential and has really driven all of civilization. By reducing risk, we reduce our fear. It only stands to reason. Now, during this pandemic, I have heard the phrase, "We are mitigating risk." I hear that practically everywhere I go. The relation of risk to fear seems really obvious in watching schools trying to cope with the virus, checking temperatures, distancing students, remote learning, some in-school learning, masks required. In restaurants, too, the number of patrons is cut by half, sometimes even by 3/4, so that we can feel even more safe. We're trying to stay safe, not knowing for sure where the COVID lurks. We're dealing as best we can with our fears. Now, this is not new human behavior. In ancient civilizations, what do? They built walled cities to feel safe. They mitigated against the risk of invasion by building up their armaments. But this all turned out to be illusions of safety as empires sent forth conquering armies, tyrants took control and people trembled, serfdom and slavery were introduced, and there were natural disasters and droughts and plagues. Life's precariousness is inherent in human existence. Life's precariousness is inherent in human existence. Fear is neither a novel nor a foreign experience for us. Now, whether we are 2 years old or 102, we are acquainted with fear. Albert Camus makes this abundantly clear in his book, The Plague, which has gained particular traction these past 6 months during the pandemic. An old man asks the book's narrator and hero, Dr. Rieur. The old man says to him, "Plague? What does that mean?" And Dr. Rieur answers, "Just life. No more than that. Just life." What's the meaning of plague? Life. Just life. No more than that. Now, I don't think we need to sink that far down in the depths of existential despair this morning. I mean, we know and we remind ourselves that life also brings joy and love and even humor. We cannot forget life's gifts and abundant blessings. But life we know, is not always safe and carefree. Our innocence does not protect us from all that is random. We all make efforts to control our environment, but the random doesn't really seem to care. I mean, why did the fires destroy homes and lives in the West? Why did the earthquake hit Magna? Whom will the plague find? Will the ice on the pond crack beneath my skates? What's that noise in the dark? I'm beginning to sound like a Hitchcock movie myself. Now, in earlier times, perhaps more primitive things made people fearful, like thunderstorms or comets or losing sunlight. Yet even with scientific explanations for humanity's former dreads, that which defines us as human, then and now, is trying to find our way in a sometimes perilous world full of unknown things and places and people. I believe that's why the iconic image of Edvard Munch's painting, The Scream, penetrates our souls so convincingly. Now, he painted The Scream in 1893. It could have been 1993. It could be today. Why did he paint it? Well, I'll quote the artist directly. One sentence. He said, "I sensed an infinite scream passing through nature." Ooh. Well, now, 117 years later, we can say, "Oh, Edvard, yeah, I know what you mean. This is the age of anxiety." No, wait. W.H. Auden referred to 1939 as the age of anxiety. Does anxiety ever leave? Of course not. The universe is irrational. But that's not the end of the story. You know, we also learn to fear. Basically, there are 3 ways in which we learn fear. And the first one, quite naturally, is through our own experience. Now, have you ever been attacked by a charging moose? Well, you learn quickly that, there's fear around that scenario, let me tell you. So you learn by your own experience. And the second thing is you learn by observation. Let's say you're sitting comfortably on your balcony and you look out and you see a moose charging. some hiker. And you say, oh, that doesn't look good. Boy, I really sense some danger right there. And third, we'd learn by instruction, such as being told where the moose is likely to be found. Now, about a half mile up the trail, which begins right on my property, there's a natural spring. And I've been told that the moose live just beyond the natural spring. So to mitigate risk, as we like to say these days, guess what? I don't hike past the natural springs. I listened to an old wise man who's been living up Emigration Canyon for about 40 years. I mean, I didn't know where the moose liked to hang out, but he did. At least he told me so, and I trusted him, and so I was instructed. Now, trusting others to tell you where there's fear, or what to fear, or whom to fear, makes us feel perhaps a little safer. I mean, fear is a very strong emotion inside us all. And if just a seed of fear is planted inside, it can really mess with your head. Fear can be a tool that actually makes you change your behavior. Now, who are those who instruct us of the things, places, and people we ought to fear? Well, to begin with, certainly parents. We rely on them to tell us where the scary places are. But even parents can be problematical sometimes, where in order to mitigate a child's natural risky behavior, they pump too much fear into the child, almost to the point of crippling them. Schools instruct us about fearfulness. We're taught to think a certain way. Now, there's not much critical thinking going on. So when we have different ideas from our classmates, well, we're a bad student. We can fail the class. We can repeat a grade. Now, do I dare to look at religion as a perpetrator of fear? Do I need to say more than just the idea of hell to teach us rather quickly where we may or may not tread? I mean, take away the fear factor from religion, and denominations will be about the size of Unitarian Universalism, I think. Now, if you want to manipulate someone, first make them afraid. Fear is the best weapon for exploiting people who feel vulnerable in a chaos world where nobody really feels safe. You know, it was a few thousand years ago when Aristotle connected the dots and said, "They who have overcome their fears will truly be free." Once you overcome your fears, then you are free. So we can imagine a child becoming free when the parent no longer dangles fear over their heads. Or the student is free when they no longer fear consequences of independent thinking. We here in the First Unitarian Church and all UU churches feel religious freedom because there's really no fear in Unitarian Universalism. Not even a little bit of guilt. So we are really free, religiously speaking. We can live in a free country only as long as the citizens are unafraid. Does that make sense? We can live in a free country as long as all the citizens are unafraid. But there are some political leaders who are keenly aware when people are afraid. And what has been true since time immemorial, fearful people regress into tribalism. The assumption is that people in your tribe can be trusted to tell you where the fear is located. Because you yourself, you can't always see what's out there in the dark. Now, some examples of tapping into our fears and tribal instincts are Nazism, the KKK, religion. So here's the pattern. Those outside our tribe receive an altogether different label, and we're told that they will harm us. The trick is turning the other group into a concept unlike us, such as those black people. Those black people want to take away our power. Those Jews who want to replace us. Those socialists, anarchists, Antifa, liberals, the left, them. They're given imaginary traits. Now, some politicians are adept at building tribal boundaries between us and them. Of course, there's also the flip side. Some politicians try to bring tribes together and heal the differences. But there are those who will teach citizens to hate others outside their tribe, even if they don't know them. A favorite story in my family takes place, in probably the mid-1930s in Nazi Germany. A maid who was on very, very good terms with my grandmother tells her about all the horrors of the Jews and all of their unforgivable sins. And my grandmother, perhaps a little perplexed, reminds the maid. She says to the maid, well, you know, I'm Jewish. And without missing a beat, she said, oh, Frau Neumann, if only all the Jews were like you, there wouldn't be a problem, would there? What I'm trying to say is that fear is uninformed. If a person is fearful, you cannot reason with them. And many of you know this to be true as you desperately try to point out logically all the flaws of a certain president. As we're talking to neighbors, we're talking to some family members, we're talking to some friends. Fear, as we've discovered, fear circumvents logic. It is said, logic is slow, fear is fast. And when you see danger, like Mexican rapists coming to get you, or the socialists who want black people to run the country, or anarchists who are rioting in the streets of our city, you want to act fast. It's almost like a reflex. And when your leader tells you where the danger lies, and the leader tells you to be fearful, well, there's no time, logical explanations. Fear wins out always. By scaring us, demagogues turn our aggression towards others. And that's why a 17-year-old kid can show up downtown with an AK-15, kill a couple of protesters to help restore order. And the demagogue will signal his approval. So somewhere in my 20s, I finally asked my mother, why do you like Hitchcock so much? Because he reminds me, she said, of how a master can manipulate fear. And she said, I'm still trying to learn how fear was used so cunningly for committing inconceivable atrocities against other people. So this conversation now took place about 50 years ago. I remember it so distinctly. She kind of looked off in a far-off corner in the room, trying to avoid any kind of eye contact. And she said, once there is fear, everything can change, even in America. No. I shook my head vehemently. No, not in America. I know you've been through some excruciating times, but Mom, this could never happen in America. And she looked at me right in the eye, and she said, every person in any country in the world, even America, every person can be exploited if they are fearful. So be it. As we extinguish the chalice, may we hear the words of Bertrand Russell. Neither a man, nor a crowd, nor a nation can be trusted to act humanely or to think sanely under the influence of a great fear. But we cannot close our service with such a gruesome reminder. Let his words speak to us instead of a great need for us to quell the fear, or to make sure that an unfearful people with independent minds will show up at the polls to vote. So in closing, let us call to mind that one verse in We Shall Overcome. I wonder if you know which one I mean, probably so. The verse says, we are not afraid. We are not afraid today. Deep in our hearts, we do believe we are not afraid today. Amen.